Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, unfortunately, overall, I'm a little bit late to the party with this, but I thought that I would still make a conversation out of this. Unfortunately, I've just been a little bit too busy lately, so I apologize for not posting quite as much. But of course, for those of you that recently ended up hearing about the conversations or recently ended up watching Mr. Shakur Stevenson's most recent performance over that, I believe, of the fighter Harutyunyan or whatever his name is, some Armenian name, I believe, but a fighter that actually gave a very competitive and tough fight, I believe, to Mr. Frank Martin, the fighter that, of course, was recently able to give Javante Tank Davis a very tough going in the first half of the fight. But of course, Javante Tank Davis was eventually able to get him out of there, or at least beat him, which is pretty much what I had predicted. But of course, the question was going to be is how well was Shakur Stevenson going to do over this fighter? And of course, Shakur Stevenson, at least from what it looked like, was more dominant against that of the European fighter than what that of of a Frank Martin was. But the thing is about Mr. Shakur Stevenson that I do have to wonder is that how great is he really going to be? And it isn't because that I think that Shakur Stevenson does not have a great amount of talent or a great amount of boxing intellect or a great amount of boxing showmanship or skills. But Shakur Stevenson does have a major thing that he is going to have to try to find a way around, or he's going to have to try to find a way to improve. And the problem is that I don't really know if there's a way for him to really improve it, and that does appear clearly to be his lack of punching power. It just is what it is. Now, it could be maybe more the fact that Shakur Stevenson, maybe he's just not quite putting his punches together as much. But I think that it's also relatively obvious that Shakur Stevenson just does not have a grade level power. It is what it is. No, people are not completely walking through his punches, but at the end of the day, Shakur Stevenson, I think that it's also very obvious that he he just does not have a grade level punching power. And it probably would not be really as big of a deal if you only had guys like Vasily Lomachenko or Devin Haney or Teofimo Lopez to deal with. When all those guys, such as Lomachenko, he'd be a little bit smaller. And on top of that, he's a little bit older at the moment. So maybe you could take advantage of that. Devin Haney is a guy that I don't find him to be as skilled as a Shakur Stevenson. So I could see Shakur Stevenson potentially beating that of Devin Haney. And on top of that, I think he would be quicker than that of a Devin Haney and better defensively. And of course, Teofimo Lopez, he's a great fighter as well, but he pretty much, he's not super great on the front foot. So there's certain things that you can take advantage of. But unfortunately for Mr. Shakur Stevenson, there is a fighter within his weight class of 135 pounds that, in my view, when he claimed himself to be the quote unquote Canelo Alvarez of the weight class, I agreed with him. And the reason why I stated that is because Javante Ting Davis, in my view, not only is he a great athlete, but he also is a generational talent in terms of a fighter. The problem is with Mr. Shakur Stevenson is that once again, I need to see what he's possibly able to do against Javante Ting Davis. Maybe the speed and maybe the footwork and maybe the boxing technique will be enough to possibly beat Javante Ting Davis. But Javante Ting Davis is a very great boxer. He's a very good and skilled boxer. And the problem is that Javante Ting Davis, he doesn't just have punching power. Javante Ting Davis has tank missiles for punching power. Of course, given the name Tank. Javante Ting Davis has explosive level punching power. And when when we talk about a power puncher that is a champion today, that is debatably overall within the top 10 pound per pound, when you talk about one shot level knockout power, you're really only talking about two main guys. You're mainly talking about Javante Ting Davis and probably that of Mr. Naoya Inoue. Now, of course, you have other guys out there like Canelo Alvarez to a degree, maybe on a lesser scale. Terrence Bud Crawford, kind of the same. And of course, you have our Better Beef as well. But, Better Beef definitely has a plus power. It's just, I'm not quite sure if his one shot knockout power is quite as good as Inoue's or Javante Ting Davis's, because Better Beef, he pretty much puts a beating on you for several rounds, but he definitely has a plus level power. But once again, it's going to be interesting to see if Shakur Stevenson, if he's going to be able to find a way around that, whether he has to put more offense together, because he is going to have to take more opportunities against Mr. Javante Ting Davis. But recently, and I thought that I would review this video by Boxing Ego, Shakur Stevenson stated something along the lines of both of his hands were injured within this fight. Of course, am I believing that? No, not necessarily. But I thought that I would talk about the conversation. But anyways, let's get into it. And here we're going to talk about, in my view, how great potentially at least Shakur Stevenson can be and if he can beat Javante Ting Davis.
Body, a guy coming off of a loss that Frank Martin almost knocked out. He's criticizing Frank Martin's performance with Artem Harutyunyan. He's saying he's the best fighter in the world. He
Which, by the way, Mr. Boxing Ego, you should have been criticizing the performance that Frank Martin had as well, because apparently it was not the most impressive performance. But what was very interesting is that Boxing Ego is very quick to criticize certain fighters that he needs to tear down, like Canelo Alvarez, for fighting guys, coming off of their worst performance, but he won't state that with Javante Tank Davis.
saying he's ready for Gervonta Davis. So when you compile all of this data that comes from Shakur and also his fans, people expected more. So it's not that you didn't defeat Artem Harutnyan, it's that he's coming off a loss. No one really thought that he would straight out beat you. You were the favorite, and people expected more, especially if you have a motor mouth and you say before the fight and during the fight, you're going to knock Artem Harutnyan out. No more, no less. You put pressure on yourself. I'm going to keep saying the same example. If Barry Bonds, before every game, talks to the media and says he's going to hit a home run, and nobody can hit the same amount of home runs, and he's going to lead the season in the MLB with the most home runs, then guess what? You've set that standard. You have now set that standard, and now live by the sword, die by the sword. So when you don't do it,
And listen, I do agree with Mr. Boxing Ego there. The thing is with Mr. Shakur Stevenson, once again, is that I just don't think that he really has great punching power. The problem is with Shakur Stevenson is that I think that, of course, obviously, he's already accomplished great things. He's already a legitimate three-weight division champion. He's within my top 10 pound per pound. But the problem is that the question is going to be, is that can he be up there with the Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s, the Manny Pacquiao's, the Canelo Alvarez's, the Terrence Bud Crawfords, the people that at one point in time were debatably the number one pound per pound fighters in the sport? Because if Shakur Stevenson is going to debatably be the number one pound per pound fighter, he more than likely is going to have to get through Mr. Gervonta Tank Davis. And I'm just not 100% sure if he's going to be able to do that. I also don't know how well he's going to be able to do it 140 pounds or a little bit higher. Because when we talk about debatably the number one pound per pound fighter, really of the really pretty much ever since boxing, that fighter not only usually was excellently skilled, or a fighter overall that could get away, with certain things in terms of the level of intelligence and skill that they had. But on top of that, they usually were debatably one of the greatest athletes on the planet, and they did have some sort of level of punching power. You had Manny Pacquiao, of course. You had that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. Now, Floyd Mayweather Jr., of course, when he started moving up the weight classes, his power wasn't quite as good, but even at 154, he still had B grade level power, probably around B plus level power. The problem is with Shakur Stevenson is that he's at his natural weight class right now, 135, and he probably has about B to B minus level power. That's going to be a problem because Shakur Stevenson, once again, he's going to have to get in that ring eventually with Gervonta Tank Davis. And Gervonta Tank Davis doesn't just have A plus level punching power. The man has S tier level punching power. The man can potentially knock you out with one shot at any given moment. So it's going to be interesting to see if that fight happens with Shakur Stevenson is going to be able to pull out of his bag, because I assure you that he is either going to have to move around for the whole entire fight and make sure that Gervonta Tank Davis does not hit him, and that he's going to have to try to show off some of his, some of his speed within that fight. The problem is that he's not really that much bigger than Gervonta Tank Davis. He might be a bit thicker than Gervonta Tank Davis, at least when I took a look at him, comparatively side by side, and a little bit taller. Well, Gervonta may be thicker because he's a pretty girthy dude for that weight class. But but Gervonta Tank Davis has about a 67.5 inch arm reach. Shakur Stevenson only has a 68-inch arm reach. The thing is that, for those of you, for example, that remember the Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez fight that happened years ago in the UFC, when Conor McGregor ended up beating that of Eddie Alvarez, Conor McGregor stated something in the aftermath, and he stated that Eddie's a warrior, he's a fighter, but you have to have some sort of advantage over me. If you don't have the skills over me, you have to have some sort of physical advantage over me. You have to have size, you have to have reach, you have to have height, you have to have length, you have to have something. And if you don't, then I'm going to tear your head off. And that pretty much is what ended up happening. Eddie Alvarez pretty much, got his ass kicked against that of Conor McGregor. And that's the thing about Shakur Stevenson. I just don't know if there's really going to be any physical advantage other than speed, foot speed, and hand speed, which of course is a great asset. But I'm not really quite sure if it's going to matter much, because Gervonta Tank Davis is a very good and sound defensive fighter when he needs to be. And on top of that, the man could potentially knock someone out at any given moment in time. Shakur is a great defensive fighter, but I promise you that with the trouble that it looked like he had with some of these opponents in the last couple of fights, he's going to have to be more offensive against Gervonta Tank Davis. And is that going to benefit him, or is that possibly going to open him up to something? Or is he potentially going to go into a defensive shell? Kind of like what he did against Edwin De Los Santos. We'll see.
Or if you can't do it and you overshot it, miscalculated it, then face the drama and the negativity. That's it. Now Shakur is coming out and he's stating that.
I know that people are, going to sit here and state that, oh, well, Shakur, he hurt, this guy, he backed him up, don't be so hard on him. Listen, at the end of the day, Shakur Stevenson was supposed to knock this dude out. He was supposed to knock this dude out, and not only was he supposed to knock this dude out, he was potentially, if he was a quote unquote knockout artist or had A-grade level power, he was potentially at least supposed to hurt very badly Edwin De Los Santos, or at least some of the other fighters that he's recently been in the ring with. The problem is that usually when you take a look at a fighter early on in their career and they're not getting knockouts over those set up fighters, they're usually not going to get them over the elite fighters. Now, every once in a while, the power will kind of appear to be a little bit better when a fighter is really pushed up against the wall. But, that's usually still with the fighter that had decent power. It just wasn't quite, it wasn't their style. Like when you talk about, that's of a Dimitri Bivol against Canelo. Bivol always had great power. It's just that he doesn't really go for the knockout. Or Andre SOG Ward, he had at least A- level power, probably for the super middleweight division. Not excellent power, not extraordinary power, but at least decent punching power, or Tyson Fury for the heavyweight division. When it came down to it, he eventually showed that he had A-grade level power. So it's like, can Shakur Stevenson do that? We'll see, but I doubt it.
Both of his hands were hurt. He says, a fan says, what? That both of his hands were hurt. He says, a fan says, was your hands hurt while fighting Artem Harutnyan? Shakur says, yeah, both of them. They fragile. I'm going to get them stronger in the offseason, though. I mean, first of all, there's only so much you can do to strengthen your hands if you have hand issues. Second, Shakur probably had hand issues because everyone hated the Edwin De Los Santos performance, right? They didn't like it. So if you listen to my breakdown for the Artem Harutnyan, he tried to step it up, but so much to a degree, that's not who you are. You're trying to compete with Gervonta Davis, it appears. Or, at the best...
Well, in my view, Shakur Stevenson had a very good performance, but the problem is, once again, with Mr. Shakur Stevenson is that he's just not gifted in that way. And when you talk about, certain fighters being the potential number one pound-for-pound fighter, they all pretty much had good level power, at least when you talk about being at their natural weight class. Canelo Alvarez, Terrence Crawford, Alexander Usyk, in a way, they all have at least enough power to hurt you very badly at their weight class or at the higher weight classes. Shakur Stevenson, really, to be quite honest with you, he should have been able to knock out Oscar Valdez and knock out some of these other guys that he was in the ring with. But he, he just, in my view, he just does not have that A-grade level power.
You're trying to listen to the crowd and you're trying to get...
And the problem is that I do not believe that this is because of his fighting style. Shakur Stevenson, he still gets a lot of hits in there, at least from what it appears. And yes, he appears to, push him back a little bit and hurt them to a slight degree. But he just doesn't appear to have that A-grade level power. Now, there are certain fighters, once again, to where just with their fighting style, they're just never going to get the knockout repeatedly. Like Dimitri Bivol has legit A-grade level power. But at the end of the day, Bivol is not a guy that is ever usually going to get that many knockouts. It's just not really his type of style. Arasani Lara is a guy that actually has A-grade level power as well. But because of his defensive fighting style, he does not usually tend to get knockouts, at least over the higher grade level opponents. The problem is with Shakur Stevenson is that he appears to also be getting in a decent amount of hits in there in some of his fights, and he's just not, able to get the knockout over some of these guys. Even over Jamel Herring, who I believe was stopped before, and of course he was the champion when Shakur Stevenson fought him, but it took 10 rounds, of an ass whooping overall for that fight to eventually be stopped, and I don't even think that it was a knockout. I think that it was a technical knockout. So Shakur Stevenson, once again, in fights that he should have already been very dominant in terms of getting the knockout or the stoppage, it hasn't happened. So once again, we'll see what happens. But once again, this is going to be an issue or an obstacle that Shakur Stevenson is going to have to try to be around. The problem is, once again, is how does he deal with it with Gervonta Tank Davis? because I can assure you that he's going to feel those those punches against Gervonta Tank Davis, and he's going to have to throw consistently against Gervonta Tank Davis and show some real mettle within that fight, or at least show something overall to win that fight that Gervonta Tank Davis has not seen before. And there definitely is going to be some things within that fight that Gervonta Tank Davis has not seen before. But the question that I have about Shakur Stevenson is how willing is he going to be to throw back against Gervonta Tank Davis, or keep very calm and cool against Gervonta Tank Davis, a fighter that can punch that can punch overall pretty much like a boulder hits. So once again, we'll see.
More aggressive. So I think Shakur was trying to make a statement, and he was trying to sit down on his punches and he did hurt Artem Harutnyan, but now he's saying his hands is messed up because you're not. That's
And once again, to bring up actually Mr. Floyd Mayweather Jr., because a lot of people may say, well, you know what, Floyd Mayweather Jr. didn't really have the greatest of power either. But Floyd Mayweather Jr. had a grade level power, at least when he was at 130 and 135, and also at 140. He had a grade level power there. Now, once he started to get up to 147, it started to deplete a little bit more, but he still had at least solid B grade level power, at least before the hand issues. The thing is with Shakur Stevenson is that, once again, the man is at his natural weight class, in terms of weights, and on top of that, like, he just doesn't appear to have that much power. And it's not like he has a 72-inch arm reach like that of Floyd Mayweather Jr. At least Floyd, like, he's gifted in that area, at least if you want to claim that the power, overall isn't going to be as much of a factor. At least he has 72 inches of reach. Shakur Stevenson does not have that long of an arm reach. He only has about 68 inches.
not your style. You're not a guy who just comes forward and thrashes guys and gets you up out of here. You're not Kermel Moton. You're not David Benavidez, Artur Beterbiev. You are not Gervonta Tank Davis. You are not a guy like Terrence Crawford. You are not whoever, Naoya Inoue. All these guys are great finishers. That hasn't. My thing is this: if it was in your arsenal and you're 27 and you've been fighting since you were probably 7 or so, we probably would have seen it by now. Like,
Agreed. Usually, once again, once fighters get around that age of 27 or somewhere around there, at least within that of boxing, usually what you see is what you're gonna get. Now, every once in a while, of course, a fighter is going to majorly adapt. I mean, there's plenty of fighters actually that have majorly adapt their game, but in terms of power, that usually is something that you're gonna see relatively early. Even if they're not a quote unquote knockout artist, you see the potential of the punching power there. Like, once again, Tyson Fury was never looked at as someone that was a George Foreman level puncher, but you at least seen the potential there with this level of punching power, or Andreas or G Ward or something like that. The problem is, once again, with Shakur is that I just don't see any level of A grade level punching.
you don't see a guy like Gervonta Davis and then they turn 27, they turn 29, and all of a sudden they got power.
Even Manny Pacquiao, for example, when Manny Pacquiao wasn't knocking out guys anymore, in his late 30s and early 40s, he still had A grade level power, at least A minus level power, because he would hit guys that you could tell that they would get hurt. That's why he knocked down Thurman. He knocked down Jesse Vargas, damn near knocked down Adrian Broner on his ass. He beat the shit out of all those guys, or beat the hell out of some of those guys, and was able, of course, to beat Thurman in that last fight, beat up him. So once again, you have to have a decent amount of, you have to have some level of punching power, and I just don't know if Shakur Stevenson has that.
And if that did happen, then it would look very suspect. Like, what did you do? Like, how did you not have power early in your career? Now you hurting guys. You know what I mean? So now Shakur, he's trying to beat the allegations of being pillow fisted. So he fought in a fight that actually had him looking worse because he had a guy hurt, couldn't finish him, and then Artem started to do better and win at least moments or some of the rounds later because you're fighting in a style that's really not you, trying to compete with Tank and trying to impress the crowd.
Right, and what that also could mean is that Shakur Stevenson, because to be fair, I didn't really watch the fight that much. What that also could mean is that Shakur Stevenson's having a little bit of an issue putting some of his combinations together, or having the confidence in his punching power. But the problem is that if that Gervonta Tank Davis fight happens soon, I promise you that's going to be a factor. And even if Gervonta does not hit you flush, just like when Canelo Alvarez, when he hits fighters, in the elbows and the biceps and the arms, in the body, you're going to feel all those shots. You're going to feel them. So once again, how is he going to react to that? We'll see.
And then all for the fans still to not appreciate it, and videos of people walking out, videos of people falling asleep. You're beefing with Cameron and Mace. It's ugly. And ultimately, if you're a Kobe Bryant, you're Michael Jordan, Floyd Mayweather, shoot or shoot. Nobody wants to hear all the excuses. Tank knocked Frank Martin out, hit a backflip, got paid, and he's out. He ain't really been on social media. You're trying to justify your win and explain it and say, oh, it's like jazz. Nobody's really trying to hear that. So now this hand injuries to both hands, I'm pretty sure this is not going to be received well. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section.
Well, once again, you don't always have to be an extraordinary knockout artist to be potentially the number one pound for pound fighter. Floyd Mayweather Jr., once he started moving up the weight classes, was a little bit of an example. Andre SOG Ward, and there might be a couple of others, Pernell Sweet Whitaker perhaps. But the problem is that those guys, once again, at least had decent punching power, especially for their weight classes. So at least when they went up the weight classes, they had about B grade level power. The problem is, once again, is that Shakur Stevenson is already at his natural weight class in a third weight class at 135, and the man has only B grade level punching power. And even certain fighters that I believe that have only recently moved up to a weight class that was probably naturally them. When you want to talk about that, the thing is that when you talk about Canelo, when he moved up to 160, which is probably more of his natural weight class, not only did he have great power that carried there, but he also had great power at 168 and even at 175. When you talk about, Terrence Crawford, he's only recently moved up to 147, which in my view is pretty much his natural weight class. But Crawford very clearly has A grade level punching power. He can take a lot of guys out, even potentially at 154, maybe even potentially at 160. So, once again, we're going to see how Shakur Stevenson deals with this. Could it maybe be that he's not putting his punches together well enough? It could be. That's a part of the issue. Or could it also be, could it maybe be that he's having a little bit of an issue putting those together because he's afraid overall, once again, that he's not going to have the level of punching power to stop his opponents and go right through them? We'll see. And once again, that Gervonta Tank Davis fight, that's going to be a very interesting fight. It's going to be a very interesting fight. I could see that fight being very similar to the Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders fight, where there's certain rounds where Billy Joe Saunders or Shakur Stevenson takes advantage of. But after a while, Canelo Alvarez and his athleticism and power, and on top of that, his boxing ability, start to take over a little bit. But we'll see. We'll see. But Shakur Stevenson, in my view, is a great fighter. But the question will be, is how great is he eventually going to become? Because usually when you talk about those number one pound for pound fighters, not only were they very gifted in terms of boxing ability, they also were very gifted in terms of the athleticism. And he's very quick. He's very speedy. But in terms of punching power, in terms of strength, he just doesn't appear to have that level of, high degree. But we'll see. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.